You've likely heard this saying that the one constant in life is change. Well, the same also applies in the workplace. Change is ever present and takes on many different forms, from things as big as department reorganizations and introducing new technology platforms, to smaller things like getting a new manager or team member. As managers, you are often at the forefront of these initiatives, and guiding your staff through a change will inevitably be a large part of what you do on a regular basis. This video is going to focus primarily on larger change initiatives, but it is important to note that all steps being discussed can be applied and tailored to meet the needs of smaller change initiatives too. Most managers have been around long enough to experience being on the receiving end of large-scale change initiatives. Most, if not all, have had experiences that left a lot to be desired being on the receiving end. Yet despite knowing what poor change management looks like, we continue to perpetuate the same mistakes ourselves when we are in the position to lead change. Generally speaking, most change initiatives look something like this. First off, management announces a change event that is going to take place, talks about the reasons for the change, the benefits of the change, why it's good for the business, and why they're personally excited about the change themselves. By and large though, the focus is primarily on the positives of the change and does not address the things that are being lost at the individual level. Management then starts to direct their staff on new ways of doing things and tends to be very involved in ensuring their staff get on board with the new way of the world, if not with their attitudes, then at least with how they spend their time. Employees then get frustrated because their concerns aren't being addressed, which often leaves a sour taste in their mouth, both with how they feel about the change and their manager. Some employees disengage fully and potentially even leave the organization, while others slowly adjust to new ways of working. Difficult conversations then take place between management and employees who are refusing to get on board with the new way of doing things, and some employees are moved out of their roles, which is not as unusual as you might think. The pace of change and acceptance among staff is often slow, with many issues arising throughout the change process that require lots of time investment for managers to course correct and amend. Eventually, staff recommit and we are back to a level of staff commitment that was present before the change itself took place, often just in time for yet another change initiative. So if we know this is how most change initiatives proceed in the workplace, what would be the optimal approach to help better ensure a much smoother transition? The first thing is to communicate more effectively at the outset of the change initiative. While there is definitely benefit in talking about all the benefits of the change initiative taking place, we also need to let staff know that we recognize that much of the changes taking place might be hard and that we call out the challenges where we can, including the negative impacts of the changes taking place. As hard as this may be for us to do as managers, it is crucial. We tend to focus on what's good for the business when we sell change, whereas employees tend to focus on what the specific impacts of the change are to them. While they usually appreciate and understand the benefits to the organization, their biggest concerns typically lie in what is being lost with the change. Essentially, they are focused on how the change impacts them specifically, rather than how it impacts the business. You need to remember that most change announcements carry a degree of shock for employees, especially if there is no anticipation of the change coming. So it is integral that while we focus on why the change is taking place and its positive aspects, that we also acknowledge the negative sides of it as well. The second area that we can make improvements in is dedicating time to listening and addressing employees' concerns about the changes taking place. This step is missed so often and in my opinion is the biggest opportunity for managers to step up their game to ensure a more successful transition takes place in a more expeditious time frame. My experience has consistently shown that the overwhelming majority of staff can get behind change initiatives if they feel like they've been heard and that they've had the opportunity to get their concerns addressed prior to changes becoming effective. Without taking the time to listen to employees' concerns before implementation, you run the very real risk of having disgruntled employees, which almost always results in a lower and slower change buy-in from them. So what does it look like to listen? It can take on many different forms, but generally speaking, it usually consists of dedicated time being set up at the department or team level for employees to bring forward their concerns, followed up by individual conversations as needed before the change gets implemented. While managers often dread these conversations, going in with an open mind and being willing to make concessions where it feels appropriate can go a long way with employee buy-in. It can also bring to light many things or missed ideas that weren't considered when the initial change idea took shape. Oftentimes, management overlooks many of the smaller impacts on the day-to-day aspects of the individual employee group, so getting their feedback and course correcting as appropriate early in the change process can save you many headaches down the road. Many managers stop the listening phase after initial team level discussion, but I would argue there is value in having at least one more subsequent follow-up conversation at the group level and to communicate openly and honestly about what of their feedback, if any, you were able to incorporate and to respond to any outstanding major questions that impact the broader group. After one or two of the group discussions, it is then appropriate to move to individual conversations with employees who have more nuanced concerns or who are still having a tough time getting on board with the changes. There are a few main reasons for taking this approach. First is that as a manager, you want to avoid creating the impression that collective disagreement will cancel the change. We can do this by limiting the amount of group opportunities to address concerns. Secondly, you want to avoid those employees who are really against the change and who are often the most vocal to have a negative impact on groupthink and to start dragging others down with them. Lastly, it gives you the opportunity to have a more targeted discussion to address concerns that would apply to the individual themselves rather than the group. Overall, the listening phase generally takes anywhere from 1 to 4 weeks, but can be longer depending on the nature of the change, especially when it comes to engaging individual employees. After we've listened to employees' thoughts on the change and taken the time to address their concerns, it is then time to implement the change itself. During this time, we can then look to be more directive by shifting conversations to ensuring employees understand the new way of doing things and supporting them as they adjust to a new norm. This may include needing to provide training, support in learning a new skill or process, or simply being more hands-on in how you support your employees with their day-to-day work. During much of this transition period, your role as a manager will be to offer up encouragement, remind them of the new ways of working when employees forget, to encourage them to experiment with the newness, and to provide positive recognition as they begin to adjust to the new norm. If you have any employees during this phase who are still actively against the change or simply not getting on board with the new way of working, it now becomes appropriate to approach their attitude from a place of performance management. This starts with feedback and awareness conversations, and in the worst case scenario could end in the termination of their employment, either voluntarily or involuntarily. This phase generally takes 1 to 4 months to get through from the onset of when the change initiative becomes effective. Once employees have begun to take to the new way of working, it then becomes crucial for you as a manager to continue to provide positive recognition and appreciation for employees adapting to the new system, but also to highlight where they've had specific success. There's also value at this time to check in with your staff as to what their thoughts are on the new norm and to see if there are small tweaks or adjustments that need to be made. This can be done at the team level or in one-on-ones. It doesn't always have to be a major meeting, but rather just a talking point in team meetings or one-on-ones. One common thing I often see is that managers become committed to their initial version of desired change and are unwilling to adjust it. Unfortunately, this is a surefire way to frustrate employees and to reduce buy-in. But by being open to feedback after employees have had time to experiment with the changes, you can not only help make the change more effective and tolerable for the employees, but you can also increase their buy-in because they feel like they've had a say in the change themselves. This phase generally takes 1 to 2 months. After this, your team should be back to full commitment in the same way they were pre-change, with this being the new baseline in which employees will evaluate future change initiatives against. When it comes to leading change, there is no one-size-fits-all approach. Every change initiative is going to be different, as will the impacts to the business and employees, along with how well the change is accepted. Some versions of change are very welcomed by staff and readoption happens quickly, and with much support. Other times, it can be a drawn-out process with many difficult conversations being held along the way. The one thing to keep in mind is that patience is key and to not rush the change management process. As you've seen from the rough timelines, acceptance of change can take upwards of 7 months, sometimes even longer. Your goal as a manager is to seek buy-in and support from employees and to help them navigate the change they're experiencing. It is unreasonable to expect all staff to get on board with all changes right from the get-go. You know the golden rule of treating others how you'd want to be treated? Well, that applies here almost more so than anywhere else when it comes to managing others. To help keep that top of mind for you, try to remember your experiences of being on the receiving end of change initiatives when leading them yourself. In summary, to encourage the fastest and highest degree of change uptake amongst your staff, there are 4 key steps to follow. Number 1, announce the change, remembering to focus on both the positive and negative aspects. Consider this day 1 of the change management process. Number 2, listen to staff concerns and be open-minded about what they bring to the table through a series of dedicated meetings and conversations. Remember, this can take anywhere between 1 to 4 weeks on average. Number 3, engage staff by providing training, recognition, and support over the next 1 to 4 months. And number 4, revise and recommit until change is fully adopted and the new baseline by which employees will gauge future change against is established. Anticipate anywhere from 1 to 2 additional months of time for this phase. While the timelines for navigating this process generally vary between 2 to 7 months depending on the degree of change, patience and fair treatment of staff are fundamental in ensuring a successful change initiative throughout the entire process. With all this being said, I hope you now feel better equipped to lead your team through change.